So we're not going to.
We'll have a moment of silence in lieu of a devotional. Thank you. Are there any announcements? Seeing none, we have appointments. Okay. Do I have that script? Oh, it's just right there. Okay, gotcha. We have 13 gubernatorial appointments, which will be referred to their committees of jurisdiction. A full list can be found in today's journal. Orders of the day. We have S-69, which was passed by the House with a proposal of amendment. The question is, shall the Senate concur in the House proposal of amendment? Senator from Windham.
Thank you, Mr. President. The amendment, as it came to us from the House, is on page 3113, which is at the front of the calendar. And this is Kids Code, or Age-Appropriate Design, which was adopted in March by this Senate in a 25-5 vote. The House received the bill, took testimony, and approved an amended bill last week with a 133-9 vote. Protecting kids from harm is a value we share across the parties and the chambers. Since we last considered this bill, large social media companies, none of whom identify as located in Vermont, are still knowingly traumatizing our children, addicting them to social media, and facilitating physical harm. I shared in March a TikTok employee message to his management that their algorithm was so addictive that kids became unable to sleep, to eat, or to look other people in the eye. That alone, at that time, was alarming to me. But then we heard how Snapchat specializes in providing access to middle school girls, and Instagram is the go-to for exploiting the vulnerabilities of high school athletes to the point of encouraging on-camera suicides. It's truly horrible. I hope you took the time to read the FBI alert, which contains even more gruesome details explained in no-nonsense law enforcement language. These harms continue, and the Kids Code bill is our best way to stop these activities. This bill complements the legislation we just passed to prohibit cell phones in schools, and both bills are necessary. This bill will protect our kids when they are not in school, for example, by prohibiting push notifications between midnight and 6 a.m. We still have not heard of any Vermont business who would be impacted by this bill. There are more than 100 lobbyists in our state house to prevent this and the data privacy bill from becoming law. They have not produced a potential covered business in Vermont. Front Porch Forum was recently mentioned as a possibility. You received an email from them last night indicating that they support the bill and abide by its requirements for both adults and kids. Please consider the contrast between speculative harm to unidentified businesses against the well-documented reality of children who we know are being harmed. So, how do the House amendments improve the bill we sent? The changes to the bill are in three general categories. The first, to make the legislation as constitutionally strong as possible, for example, focusing on design code rather than content. Second, removing customer number thresholds in the definition of covered businesses to make the requirements more clear and to focus on activities and outputs rather than the external characteristics that don't necessarily lead to harms to children. The third change is to push the effective date to 2027 and direct the Attorney General to use this time to promulgate rules before the law goes into effect. This gives businesses more time to work directly with the AG and in a setting that might be more comfortable for them. At this time, I will yield to the Vice Chair of the Institutions Committee, also known as the junior senator from Bennington, to speak to the detail of the changes.
The senator from Wyndham yields to the senator from Bennington.
And thank you, Mr. President. So now that I know what the bluff is, I was encouraged to try to kill it, but I'm going to lean into it. And those that are following the bill, I'm going to bring you to page 3125. So the bottom line here is the effective dates. We have a clarifying amendment for this that we'll see later on, but this is the major amendment that was presented to us by the House, and that is, as Senator from Wyndham mentioned, changing the effective dates. This pushes it out 6 months and requires the Attorney General to promulgate rulemaking at the same time. So it gives the Attorney General less time, but it makes the effective dates further out, which gives everyone a much longer on-ramp for age-appropriate design code. So at the same time that businesses are preparing to deal with this, they're going to be working hand in hand with the Attorney General to straighten out the rules and identify any road bumps that are along the way. And in the meantime, we'll have the second session of this biennium if we do need to make any changes to that. So hand in hand with that, I'll bring you to page 3119. This is the other major change from the House, is removing the threshold requirements that would have excluded some small businesses. And essentially there are 3 reasons why the House did this, and we are concurring with all of the amendments, but the 3 reasons are, essentially we don't know of any businesses that would actually fall under that exclusion. So the 18-month on-ramp will help identify anyone that might fall under. And as I mentioned, they'll be working in parallel with the AG's office to prepare and reveal any issues. Furthermore, the fewer exclusions from a bill makes it more viable to any potential court challenges. And really the main reason from the House why that exclusion was taken out was essentially, why should anyone, big or small, be allowed to harm children? The only other aspect or amendment in the exclusions was the word data was removed from the Graham-Leach-Bliley exclusion. The intention was for it to only apply to financial institutions and not to a broad universe of data, and that's why that amendment appears. So now, from the bottom back to the top on page 3113, I'll walk through them section by section that remain. So the definitions section, this is the section where most of the changes appear. So the House removed a somewhat oblique requirement regarding sensitive data, and that resulted in the removal of several unnecessary technical definitions. Other definitions are clarified or redundancies removed. One example is, and I'm going to lean into the dad joke on this one, the definition of minor no longer contains a residency requirement because the definition of covered minor does include that requirement. And believe it or not, this minor change actually lessens the compliance burden for businesses. So that's part of the reason for that change. The definition of processor is expanded to close a potential loophole that the House had identified, and other definitions removed any reference to speech elements. And this is to basically forestall any sort of constitutional challenges. And that really was a major focus of the House to make sure that this would stand up to constitutional scrutiny. So one example of that is a reference to advertisements was removed from the definition of reasonably likely to be accessed, and there's no longer a content reference as a limitation to the definition of social media platform. The next section's minimum duty of care. It's essentially unchanged, but religion was added to the anti-discrimination language. And the House corrected our mistake that left discrimination out of the content exclusions, which is another one of the many First Amendment protections in the bill. Required default privacy settings and tools. That was just reworded, no substantive change. The transparency section, the House removed any hint that a business would be required to divulge any trade secrets, but really there's no substantive change there. Prohibited data and design practices. Again, essentially no difference except the House changed the word consumer to individual. The age assurance privacy section, the House clarified the privacy requirements of age assurance and used an age range instead of a binary determination on whether a person is or is not a minor. And that is to make compliance easier. And the remainder of the sections, enforcement limitations and rights and freedoms of covered minors, there were no changes at all to that. So that brings us back to the bottom line, Mr. President, and I yield back to the Senator from Wyndham.
The senator from Bennington yields to the senator from Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator. So bottom line, one of the bottom lines, it's our job to protect our kids, and this is a solid bill. The Institutions Committee reviewed the amended bill and voted 3-0-2 to recommend it. We have an additional proposal of amendment that you should have. And Senator Plunkett and I move that the Senate concur in the House proposal of amendment with a further proposal of amendment, which changes the effective dates.
Senator Harrison has moved that the Senate concur in the House proposal of amendment with a further proposal of amendment. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The motion carries. Now have S-109, which was passed by the House with a proposal of amendment. The question is, shall the Senate concur in the House proposal of amendment? Senator from Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to briefly provide some of the procedural history. It took some gymnastics to get to this point, and we'll also provide some clarity as to why we have this amendment. So our committee presented S-109 earlier on in the session and passed with a unanimous voice vote. We received the bill back from the other body with almost 20 pages of new policy and task forces, and we received it on the day that morning committees stopped meeting. So once we began taking testimony on it and discovered there were policies that were considered controversial and financially impactful, I realized it was going to be rather unlikely that we could do our due diligence in reviewing all of the new content that was sent to us. So it was at that moment I said to myself, what would Senator Sears do? And I ordered the bill to lie. After conversations with my committee members and the other body, the compromise that we reached was to essentially remove a large portion of the other body's proposals that were considered either controversial, financially impactful, or generally unnecessary. So for this report, I'm going to primarily focus on the things that we didn't take out, just the parts of the other body's amendment. And if there are questions about what we've already passed, I can answer those, but for the sake of time, we revisit what we've already voted on. So the changes that the Senate Judiciary Committee agreed to are as follows. I also forgot to note that I would recommend senators start on page 3147, which is the amendment I proposed to address this bill. So we agreed to strike the provisions related to the public inebriates because that language was already signed by the governor in S-36. The other body also made several additions to the composition of the Firearms Surrender Order Compliance Working Group, which the Judiciary Committee agreed to. However, we retained the Senate approach of having the Center for Crime Victim Services and the Council on Domestic Violence as members of the working group rather than consultants. Section 25 reinstates the ability of a court in an adoption proceeding to consider whether a person asserting parental rights has made reasonable and consistent payments to support the minor child when determining whether termination of parental rights is in the best interest of the child. Sections 25A and 25B make clear that in proceedings by DCF to terminate parental rights, as opposed to private adoption proceedings, a person's child support payment history is not a basis for terminating a person's parental rights. Family law practitioners and DCF agreed to these changes. Section 26 repeals an outdated criminal penalty for failure of an adult child to support the adult child's parent if that parent is destitute and unable to support themselves. This statute has been on the books for decades without being enforced, so it is repealed in Section 26. Section 27 was requested by the Center for Crime Victim Services and concerns the Earned Time Program managed by the Department of Corrections. Under the program, an offender who receives an earned time reduction in sentence must be notified of the reduction no less than every 90 days. Section 27 adds victims to this notification schedule so that a victim who opts into the system would receive notice of the earned time reduction at the same time the offender does. Section 28, which was also requested by the Center for Crime Victim Services, creates the Victim Notification Task Force with the goal to review and improve the responsiveness of Vermont's victim notification system. Section 29, I believe this was an issue that was also raised by the senator from Addison regarding courthouse construction. The section adds 3 new criteria to the list of factors the court administrator must consider when evaluating capital funding requests made by assistant judges for county courthouses. And the section does not become effective until July 1st, 2026, so that the assistant judges have time to adapt to the new requirements. Section 30 concerns the criminal penalties for a second or subsequent DUI offense. The current maximum penalty is 2 years of incarceration or a $1,500 fine or both. There's also essentially a mandatory minimum that must include either 200 hours of community service or 60 consecutive hours of incarceration. Defendants have had a tendency to choose 60 hours of incarceration rather than community service due to the significant difference in the time commitment. Section 30 attempts to incentivize state's attorneys and defendants to choose the community service alternative by reducing the minimum amount from 200 hours to 80 hours. The Judiciary Committee removed a House provision that had sunsetted this section in 3 years, since its effectiveness can be determined without necessarily repealing the entire law. Sections 31 and 34 are a rewrite of H219, an act relating to establishing the Department of Corrections Family Support Program, which previously passed this session but was vetoed by the governor due to language requiring the Department of Corrections to propose sufficient funding in its budget proposal to the governor. There were concerns about constitutionality only for this funding section. After reworking the bill to address the governor's concerns, the language now only proposes to create gender parity to access family support programs and services at each of the state's correctional facilities. We did receive written testimony from the governor's general counsel that they were supportive of this change. Lastly, Section 35 provides that the bill takes effect on passage, with 2 exceptions. First, the provision amending the diversion program statute takes effect on July 2nd, 2025, which is necessary to accommodate several other diversion program amendments that will go into effect on July 1, 2025. Second, the provision requiring additional information in county budget requests involving county courthouses does not become effective until July 1, 2026. So again, that the assistant judges have time to adapt to the new requirements. We received testimony on this amendment both in writing and in person from Legislative Council, the chair of the House Institutions and Corrections Committee, the Governor's General Counsel, the Department of Children and Families, family law practitioner, the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, Vermont Legal Aid, Vermont Parent Representation Center, court administrator from the Vermont Judiciary. The vote in committee was 5-0-0, and I ask for the Senate's support.
The senator from Windham has moved that the Senate concur in the House proposal of amendment with further proposal of amendment. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries. Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I would move that the Senate suspend its rules in order to take up H91. Pending interruptions from the senator from Windham, or Windsor. Let me begin again. I would move at this time the Senate suspend its rules and pending entrance on the notice calendar, H91 be taken up for immediate action.
Senator from Chittenden has moved that the Senate suspend its rules in order to take up H91 pending its entry on the notice calendar. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, motion carries. We now have H91. Let's see if I can read the title. An act related to the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsiveness Transition to Housing Program. I have that number two, okay. The Committee of Conference has submitted the report as found on the handout in front of you. And the question is, shall the Senate accept and adopt the report of the Committee of Conference? Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Conference on H91 completed its work yesterday, and we bring this report to you. As you recall, this VHARTH, the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, is a bill that will integrate or change our current general assistance program and reduce our dependence on the hotel motel program, which has caused so much concern to so many of us in different ways. One, organizationally across the state and how to help folks, and two, in the cost that has been incurred through that program. So this bill, and it feels like we just went through this very recently in here. So I will go through the changes that have been made within the Committee of Conference. And to start off, I'll say that really the bulk of the proposal that Senate sent back to the House has been accepted by the other chamber. But there are some changes that have been made that I think improve the bill through the Committee of Conference process and with recommendations from the House, and then negotiation, as we all know, happens in the conference process. So looking at, and I will not refer to the handout except by section number and chapters and chapter sections. So section 1 of the findings, we added a finding regarding homelessness data, which is listed number 2 on, it's on my page too, but it's number 2 in the findings on the front page that you'll see. We updated the findings number 9, so we changed it from constructed to facilitated construction. On legislative intent, we added language that not only are we incorporating GA emergency housing, but also the Housing Opportunity Program to transition into VHARTH on July 2027. This was something that the House proposed to the Senate. We had 2028 for that integration, and the House proposed 27, which we accepted. Their original proposal was 26. We also, in legislative intent, added a subdivision indicating that it's the intent of the General Assembly that in fiscal years 27 and 28, emergency shelters services currently funded through HOP, the Housing Opportunity Program, will be funded at levels equivalent or greater to 25 levels. We didn't want to say an amount. We can't promise that, but we want to ensure that this program will begin to replace the programs that we currently have. In section 3, there were no changes until purpose section 2202. We added HOP, Housing Opportunity Program, and with the General Assistance Emergency Program, as we had indicated earlier. In definitions, 2203, we modified the definition of household to include an intent to stay in Vermont. One of the concerns was the transiency issue. We've added that. The administration was interested in that in particular. 2204, regional advisory councils. One of the things that the Senate proposed was having a regional council for looking at local needs. And so some of the language has been modified there. The House did accept our proposal on regional advisory councils. And then it's the composition of the council who is involved, including folks with lived experience, local housing coalitions, local continuum of care, and others. In that same section, we also have a requirement that council participants are allowed to participate in not more than 8 meetings annually. In section 4, really, there's no substantive change in the Senate proposal. There was some language improvement that asked the regional CAT agencies to capacity to perform or cost to perform certain core services. And then continuing in 2206 on the core services, there we have addition to the intake assessment process so that there are intake assessments and services for diversion include regional intake shelters unless the Department of Children and Families and a community action agency agree otherwise. We added the word advocacy later on. Under the use of hotel and motel programs, 2212, we added language that under A, requires the state to reduce the use of hotels and motels as more shelter capacity becomes available and the number of households experiencing homelessness decreases. It's implicit in the bill that we want to see, and it's actually explicit in the bill that we want to see a reduction in the use of hotels and motels and are moved toward permanent housing. D, under 2207, we added some language that when hotels and motels are used, that a community action agency must ensure relevant support services are available. Then we also said that when motels and motels are used, where there may be blocks of hotel rooms for population-specific placements. And then in addition, must not utilize hotels and motels outside the community action agency or entity's region, in other words, keeping folks close to home, and unless it's approved by the DCF or a written MOU between the regional community action agencies. This was a reassurance, I think, both to the people who are looking for shelter as well as for the administration and for the local community action agencies. 2208, duties of the Department of Children and Families. We added that the department should consult with the community action agencies and statewide organizations serving households experiencing domestic or sexual violence to develop appropriate measures and methods for accountability of providers and the execution of VHARTH duties, including the effect on households receiving services and an accounting of expended funds. In other words, we want to know what's going on. We'll get some information back to DCF through consultation. There were some other minimal language changes there. In 2209, we added reporting back on having a needs assessment every 3 years, that there will be plans developed by community action agencies. Those plans should be submitted to the DCF and the Regional Planning Committee that was previously indicated earlier. So the plans for needs assessment will be given to DCF and the committee in the region every 3 years. There are other reporting requirements. 2210, we modified the language in that section. And then section 5, there were other really minimal language changes. Similarly with section 6, section 7, just a renumbering. Section 8 is the appropriation section. We actually have one of the concerns about this bill, because the bill had $10 million that was carried along with it and granted to it through the appropriations, by the Appropriations Committee. One of the concerns was $10 million is quite a high amount. We've actually eliminated $3 million of that. And so it adds up to $7 million. So a savings there. And then some minimal language to the distribution of the funds, so that the distribution of the funds that go to DCF to the VHARTH implementation plan will be mutually agreed upon schedule and a process for that. So the work begins in '26, but it goes on for a while. So there have to be some negotiation and some collaborative working to utilize the funds. Then there's section 9 is an addition. So it's the VHARTH transition language, so that between July 2025 and July 26, pursuant to a mutual agreement between the Department of Children and Families and a community action agency or statewide organization serving people experiencing domestic or sexual violence, specific elements of VHARTH may take place prior to July 2026. And that's subject to conditions, a 30-day notice to affected households, 30-day notice to Joint Fiscal Committee, House Human Services, and Senate Health and Welfare, and then a posted notice on the DCF website. In other words, what this means is there are a lot of assessment pieces, there are a lot of work that would go on and helping people find shelter or housing, and this would allow that work to begin earlier than '26, should there be an agreement for that to happen. Then the effective dates in section 10, and as I said before, the addition in section to allowing specific elements to take place for the transition that I just described. The bill takes effect on 7/25, and then DCF is directed to commence rulemaking on 7 to have rules available by the time VHARTH goes into effect on July 1st, 2026. So that's a quick review of the work that your Committee on Conference did, and we ask that the Senate accept this report. There was a lot of work embedded in the bill, both by the House, by the Senate, by the administration, and hopefully we've gotten to a good place to move forward and away from the hotel motel program, at the same time supporting people who are either homeless or at risk of being homeless. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the Senate accept and adopt the report of the Committee of Conference? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I request a recess since it's the first time?
We'll take a
we've seen
brief
this?
recess. The question is, shall the Senate accept and adopt the report of the Committee on Conference? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter?
The reporter is interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. In respect to whatever the section is, because this does not appear to have page numbers, that is prior to section 2208. And I think the heading of that is simply 2207, the use of hotel and motel rooms. And under that, subparagraph D4, which refers to may use population-specific placements to the extent certain populations are not isolated from the wider community served through the program. And I wonder if the reporter can tell us what that means.
Yeah, thank you. And this was, I believe, part of the underlying bill and the intent of the bill, that if a block of motel or hotel rooms is reserved for use, suppose for a group of folks requiring specific kinds of services, so substance use disorder services or services that are for folks with disabilities, that they would be, that's the population-specific placement. And then not wanting to isolate them from the wider community is to ensure that the services that they need are available nearby. So they're not placed in a hotel or motel 6 miles on top of a hill from the community.
Mr. President, I understand that one of the principal arguments that have been made against the motel and hotel program is that people are not able to receive services, or many of the services that are provided in congregate settings or in larger group settings are not available to people in the hotel motel. Does that suggest that there's any intent to prioritize delivering services at that level?
So the priority is not to use hotel and motel. That's a priority. But if and when they are used, then to ensure that folks receive the services that they need. And if you have a population that needs a certain similar type of service, that they are within distance of receiving those services.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Are you ready for the question? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter of the bill?
The reporter is interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I know one of the changes that was in this bill was moving a date from 2028, I believe, to 2027 as a compromise about the HOP program. And I have expressed my concern for many times over this session about changes to that program, because it's actually a housing program that's working really well, and it's working well in my county. And I am concerned about this overall shift to using the community action organizations, especially because the community action organization that represents my county is often very focused on the other county that it works in, namely Chittenden County, and does not really pay much attention to Addison County. So what assurances in this bill are there that these community action organizations are actually going to look broadly at all of the area that they represent, and that the HOP program, which is working well, will not be destabilized by this program, especially given that it's now a faster timeline to eliminate or subsume that program into something larger?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a question that our committee really looked at many times, and we did hear from folks who were providing shelters in various regions of the state who were concerned about the Housing Opportunity Program being destabilized. And one of the things that we continue to say, I believe as I presented the bill and as Senator from Chittenden Central presented the bill when it was on the floor, we reiterated time and again that there was no intent to destabilize the HOP program. Having said that, there is an opportunity here, Housing Opportunity Program, but there is an opportunity here to build greater relationships, collaboration, and work together. One of the things that's in the bill, the Regional Advisory Committee, so it's made up of folks not just from one area, but the entire region. You know, communication, in particular with the Addison County HOP, sent me that concern, and I replied back about, well, we've extended the date out, as you have indicated, Mr. President, the date to 28 in our original bill, and now to 27, so there's a full year of consideration and discussion as work goes on. But that Regional Advisory Committee will be in place, and when I heard back from most of the HOPs indicated that they were very interested, and for their own sake, to be very much engaged in the transition process. Given that the bill goes into effect on July 25, that VHARTH, the organization for the regional committees, goes into effect on July 26, and then there's a whole year before how HOP is integrated. The consideration for that integration will take place between the administration, DCF, and with the regional advisory committees, and with folks both and HOP.
I think we'll take a brief recess.
Both in HOP.